Hello, hello, hello. It's Rebecca Happy here with Ottawa Buzz TV, and today I'm here again to introduce you to Diane Valiquette, Ottawa's divorce recovery coach. We're doing a little mini series on parental alienation. We did part one last week, and this week we're going to do part two. She's going to be talking to us today about a book written by an Ontario judge, which addresses a horrendous story, which was all about parental alienation and ended in disaster. So, welcome back to the show, Diane.
Oh, thank you, Rebecca. Hi. So yes, I'm going to talk about, I think the worst case ever. I mean, obviously, the worst case ever in parent alienation, and the reason why it's the worst case ever is that the little boy ended up killing himself. So, Harvey. I think, yeah, Harvey Brownstone was a judge in Toronto and in family law, and he wrote this book because, and there's an interview with him if you watch him on YouTube explaining why he wrote this book. And I guess this case, to sum it up, this case really, really hurt him and really made him understand or really take in how bad some cases are when they end up in trials, when they end up in front of judges. So it was this little boy, and they only had one, and this time it was dad playing like big, big, big head trips with his son. He would say, your mom doesn't really love you because that's why she left me and then she wanted to leave you. But, I convinced her that you were important as well. And so he would do kind of some of those really behind the scene comments about the mom. And then the little boy would go to see mom and he'd ask, like daddy said, and this is what happened. And then the little boy would go back and say, mommy said that that's not true. And so he started to teach him how to, like, you can't talk to your mother about this because she'll deny it. And that's, she just lies like that and she won't tell you the truth, but I'm telling you the truth. And, and all along, for me, and for me listening to this story, I read the book. It's called Tug of War by Harvey Brownstone, and I mean, it's mind-boggling. It's mind-boggling that you say this man loves his children or loved his child, and in the end, the child kills himself. And I think he leaves a letter. I'm sorry, I can't remember. It was like 10 years ago when I read the book, but the child leaves and says, I didn't want to fight anymore, and you guys were always miserable, and it was because of me. And what people don't understand, it's exactly that, kids. Where you put, the parent completely wrong all the time, or, you talk behind the backs of that parent and you make up stuff that the other parent is saying. It comes a time when the children feel that they're not okay, that they're really bad and they're not okay because they're scrutinized for talking to the other parent. They're scrutinized by standing up for the other parent. And so what they do is they grieve and they hurt in silence. And that's what happened to this little boy. He was hurting in silence, and he ended up taking his own life. And he just because he couldn't take it anymore. And imagine, you're a little person, and you have both parents, and you love each other, like the both parents love you, and they're civil with each other, and then there's a breakup. And not only does this little boy have to go through the breakup, he has to go through, daddy really, really despising and hating mom. And so he plots behind, really having mom not have the child as much, and trying everything he can to alienate the child from his mother because he hates his mother so much. And yet in turn, our society or people and even lawyers don't stand up and say, this sounds like a case of alienation and I'm not taking your case. And our system again is that, and you can't blame lawyers. They hear one side, right? So I have, a really good friend who actually went through, and it was the dad this time, and he's been doing it for years. I mean, he alienated, so he was married, they were married, and they lost a little boy. And then from there, mom was traumatized by accident. The little boy passed away, and then they had a little girl at the time, and they moved from the house back to, with her parents. And they were living with the parents, and the mom started to see that her daughter's husband was kind of really bullying her and so on, and started to speak up a little bit. Then they ended up moving from the mom's place, having another daughter, and they had two kids. And not long after, he became, somewhat physical, and she finally had the balls to leave him. And he was like horrendous. I met him to try to do a mediation. It was so aggressive. It was so convoluted, which is the same thing that they say in this book, tug of war. And I don't understand, and that's the piece that I have such a hard time with, is, lawyers who are representing these people should be able to hear the other side, right? There should be a mandatory, if you're hearing something like really heavy and really bad, there should be some kind of obligation, let's say, for the two lawyers and the couple to come to the table right away to see, is this a case of alienation? Is this a case of, what dad is saying is so, far-fetched and so made up and so awful? And, I believe that if you came to a panel, and I know, like, so I lived in New Jersey for a while, and the law there, family law, is you cannot go to court until you have had a recommendation from the panel. So you go to, you do all the paperwork and the discoveries and the affidavits and everything like that. But prior to going to court, and you can't go to court actually until you've attempted 2 sessions with this panel. And the panel is 2 lawyers, 2 social workers, and a parent coordinator and or a child therapist. And both lawyers have to present their case to this panel, and the panel gives a recommendation. And if they don't agree, if the parents don't agree to that recommendation, they have to pass another panel. And then if they don't agree again, it ends up in court. But court obviously is going to back up the recommendation and take it even a step further and really penalize the parent who is continuously not agreeing to what is being recommended, right? And here in Canada, or I say Canada, I say in Ontario, it seems like, you can go back and forth with the letters and back, and, and I know this case, I know her personally, and, they went back and forth, and finally they got 50-50, but in the 50-50, dad was saying how bad, their mother was, and how you can never tell what goes on in this house to at your mom's because this is really private. Then dad meets someone else and, becomes aggressive with someone else. They go to trial. She wins full custody and is allowed to move away. And yet, in interim of that second wife gets full custody, and yet her other 2 children from the first marriage, they're going 50-50. And so they're not even looking at the global of the family and saying, like, okay, if you're giving this mom 100% due to what dad is doing, and yet you're going to give the second or the 2 other kids 50-50, like, it makes no sense, and I know that lawyers try to see through that, and judges try to see through that, and it's difficult. It's difficult when you have a client and you're kind of believing him because you don't know the other side. And so for me, it's like, how can we get to a place where when there's a whole bunch of arguments like this, and especially, money's money. So there's accountants, pensions, division of assets, and fight about that. Okay, that's a war. But I think when it comes down to the access and custody of children, there should be an input of a panel, and the parent really, telling their story or saying what they think should happen and why they think that should happen, and have, the panel make a recommendation for the best outcome for the children. And we're not doing that. Like, well, I know this case went to trial. It goes to court. It goes to the office of the children's lawyer. The kids get interviewed. If they don't say the right thing, then, there's psychiatrists involved. There's a bunch of stuff. And yet, he continues to fire everybody, continues to disagree with everyone, gets them all the way fired, all the way to a trial. And then in the trial, it ends up that because his paperwork's good, he shows up okay, I guess. And again, they go 50-50. So all that money, $30,000 down the tube, done. And then as soon as he wins, he starts to show all the paperwork to his oldest daughter, or starts telling his oldest daughter that your mom's boyfriend is really mean and he's not a good guy. And I checked up on him, and he has all these bad things. And so the oldest girl starts to believe it. And she starts, acting up at home. And so the stepdad kind of steps in and says, okay, well, this is not cool. You're not my father. I'm going to my dad's house. My dad told me about how bad you are. And it just, like, I can go on, right, for days and days. But the bottom line is, for me, is if we could, as a whole, and if we hear people, and you hear that there's a sense of maybe alienation, or a sense of, turning one parent against the other, and people are talking about it, we should stand up to that. And we should say, you know what, I don't agree with you. And I think what you're doing is not okay. And I think a lot of us don't say anything because you're afraid to not, because you don't know the whole story, or, we don't know how to approach this topic. But if more people would, align themselves with really hearing, and if they're friends with people that they're hearing some alienation, call it up. Tell your friend what you're doing is not cool. Because again, you guys didn't hate each other when you guys got married, and you didn't hate each other, obviously, when you had these children. And you're not divorcing your kids, you're divorcing each other. And so stop making the kids be the reasoning for fighting, and stop putting the kids in a place where they're actually believing one parent, because then, you know what, they lose the other parent for what? Right? In the end, they're not going to be able to do relationships healthy. They're not going to feel that they were loved equally by both parents, because at too much of a young age, they turn against one parent. And later on in life, they're not even going to understand why that happened. So, all that to say is, it's a really touchy subject, and it's really a sad subject. So I encourage you, I think Rebecca's going to put it down at the bottom, to go to YouTube and watch some videos that Harvey Brownstone did. And if you're interested and you're going through, an alienation case and so on, maybe pick up the book, Tug of War, and it will really just explain signs and explain some kind of strategies, I believe, that he has in there as well, that you can almost not play or be in front of. As I'm going to leave you today with, I'm going to have some pointers on what do you do when one of them saying to the other, to the kids, there's a secret, but you can't tell dad. There's a secret, but you can't tell mom. I'm going to go through some of those scenarios. I'm going to go through some scenarios where things are happening that are not feeling good for the children, and that they come home either to dad or to mom, and the mom or the dad goes hysterical, call each other, start screaming and yelling. I'm gonna come up with tips on some things that we can do differently, so that the kids don't feel like they're in the middle of any kind of battle. All right. So if you're interested, go to Tug of War and go watch some videos that this judge did, because they're pretty good.